The rain fell in sheets, heavy and relentless, painting the night in streaks of silver and shadow. Beneath the neon glow of the towering skyline, a lone figure stumbled through the puddled streets of Nova 5, the last bastion of human civilization on the fringe of the galactic rim. Elias Verne, a cybernetic engineer with a penchant for salvaging forgotten relics of the past, moved with purpose through the labyrinth of alleys and neon-soaked thoroughfares. His footsteps echoed against the metal-plated ground, each step a reminder of the weight he carried, both physical and otherwise. Elias had always been drawn to the abandoned, the discarded. In a world obsessed with progress, he found beauty in forgotten things, in remnants of lives that once thrived. Tonight, however, his scavenging had led him to something far beyond the usual scraps of ancient tech. A discovery that whispered secrets of a lost civilization and pulsed with a strange, unearthly light. Tucked under his arm was a small, metallic orb, smooth, weighty, and humming with a dormant energy. He'd found it deep within the junkyards beyond the city walls, buried beneath layers of debris from a time when humanity still dreamed of the stars. The device radiated a faint, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a relic. It was alive. Back in his cramped workshop, surrounded by wires, flickering monitors, and the faint scent of burnt circuitry, Elias examined the orb with a mix of fascination and unease. As he ran his fingers over its surface, a sudden jolt of energy coursed through his body, and in an instant, the room was filled with a soft, ethereal glow. From within the orb, a figure began to take shape, shimmering and fragile like the first rays of dawn breaking through the gloom. She was unlike anything Elias had ever seen, an alien of a kind lost to time, her form delicate and translucent, her eyes vast and empty. She moved with a tentative grace, reaching out as if grasping for something unseen. Elias could only watch, his breath caught in his throat. The being before him exuded an aura of sorrow and longing, her presence a ghostly echo of a once vibrant existence. "Who are you?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien did not respond with words, but rather with a projection of memories that flooded Elias' mind in a cascade of emotions and images. He saw towering crystalline spires under twin suns, endless fields of shimmering flora, and a world bathed in hues beyond human comprehension. But most striking of all was the darkness that followed, a consuming void that swallowed everything, leaving behind only her. Elias understood then. She was the last of her kind, a being who had wandered the vast emptiness of space in search of something, someone, to see her, to understand her existence. Driven by equal parts curiosity and empathy, Elias resolved to help her. He pored over ancient texts, deciphered forgotten languages, and connected with those who still remembered the old ways of alien technology. As days bled into nights, he learned that her species had once possessed a profound ability to perceive the universe in ways humans could scarcely imagine, a vision that transcended the physical and touched the essence of existence itself. But now, she was blind, her connection severed by the destruction of her homeworld. Elias, with his skill in cybernetics and human ingenuity, became obsessed with the idea of restoring her sight, of granting her the ability to see once more. As he worked tirelessly, their bond deepened. Despite the barriers of language and biology, they found ways to communicate, through touch, through shared experiences, and through the unspoken understanding of two lost souls seeking purpose. The alien, whom Elias named Leora, would often trace the contours of his face with gentle curiosity, while he would explain the concept of sight in human terms, showing her colors, shapes, and the wonders of Nova 5. But not everyone saw Leora the way Elias did. Whispers spread through the underground tech circles about the alien presence in his workshop. Some viewed her as a threat, others as an opportunity, a chance to exploit her for profit or power. Elias found himself caught in a web of intrigue, pursued by those who sought to claim Leora for their own purposes. As he neared a breakthrough in his efforts to restore her vision, Elias realized that the greatest challenge was not the technology, but the understanding of what it truly meant to see, not just with eyes, but with heart, with memory, and with hope. Elias paced the dimly lit confines of his workshop, his mind racing through potential solutions and countermeasures. The growing tension gnawed at him. Whispers of Leora's presence had spread like wildfire, and it was only a matter of time before those with darker intentions came knocking. Despite his efforts to keep her hidden, the allure of her existence was too great for the scavengers and mercenaries of Nova 5 to resist. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a coded message blinking on his terminal, a cryptic warning from an old friend within the underground network. "They're coming. Be ready." Elias swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he traced the message on the flickering screen. His grip on hope felt fragile, yet he knew he couldn't allow fear to dictate his actions. He turned to Leora, her translucent form shimmering faintly in the artificial glow of the lab. "We'll figure this out," he promised, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince more, himself or her. Despite their growing connection, Elias struggled to bridge the gap between their vastly different existences. Leora's silent gestures and emotive presence conveyed her anxiety, but there was more, a sorrow too profound for words. She had begun to understand the dangers surrounding them, sensing the desperation in Elias' every movement, the way his eyes darted to the workshop's reinforced entrance whenever a shadow passed by. The first intrusion happened at night. A group of armed figures clad in dark armor breached the perimeter, their movements precise and calculated. Elias barely had time to react before they were inside, tearing through his equipment with a ruthless efficiency that spoke of experience. Leora, despite her ethereal nature, trembled as she clung to the edge of a console, her wide eyes darting toward Elias in silent plea. Elias' pulse hammered in his ears as he activated a hidden failsafe, a surge of electromagnetic energy that momentarily disrupted their pursuer's tech, giving him enough time to grab Leora and escape through a concealed exit. The streets of Nova 5 were a maze of grime and flickering neon, but Elias knew them well enough to evade immediate capture. He pressed forward, his mind racing through potential safe houses and allies who might still be willing to help. The betrayal came swift and without warning. A contact he once trusted, lured by the promise of wealth, sold them out to the highest bidder. Elias barely escaped the ambush. The sting of a grazing plasma shot burning through his sleeve. Leora's expression was a mirror of his own desperation, her fingers curling around his arm as if grounding herself in his presence. "We can't keep running forever," he muttered under his breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like an unbearable burden. The only way forward was to fight back, but Elias knew he was outmatched in every conceivable way. His usual methods of outsmarting rivals through tech and cunning weren't enough against the relentless pursuit they faced now. He needed allies, resources, and more time, all of which were in short supply. Leora, sensing his turmoil, reached out and placed a hand against his temple, sharing fragments of her own strength and resilience. It wasn't much, but it was enough to steel his resolve. In the darkness of a long-forgotten hideout beneath the city, Elias formulated a plan. He pored over stolen schematics and cobbled together devices from salvage parts, each creation a testament to his desperate ingenuity. He couldn't simply hide anymore. He needed to strike back in ways his enemies wouldn't expect. For every move they made, he would counter with something sharper, smarter, more unpredictable. Yet, the deeper he delved into this game of survival, the more he found himself questioning his motives. Was he fighting for Leora, for himself, or for something greater? The lines blurred with every decision, but one thing remained clear. He could not afford to fail. Leora's future, and perhaps even his own, depended on it. With every passing hour, the noose tightened, and Elias knew it was only a matter of time before their enemies made their final move. But for now, he had hope, and in the shifting shadows of Nova 5, hope was a rare and precious thing. Elias crouched in the darkness of the hideout, his pulse steadying as he listened for any signs of pursuit. The distant hum of Nova 5's ever-present traffic filtered through the cracks in the walls, but inside, all was still. Leora sat cross-legged on the floor, her translucent skin catching the dim glow of the overhead light. Her eyes, vast and empty as the void between stars, held an unspoken question. "We're running out of time," Elias muttered, rubbing his temple. He had cobbled together an array of makeshift defenses, tripwires laced with shock charges, holographic decoys, but he knew they wouldn't hold off the mercenaries for long. "We need a way off this rock." Leora tilted her head, sensing the anxiety that radiated from him like heat. With a gentle movement, she reached out and traced the air with delicate fingers. A soft projection flickered to life, an image of a distant star system, clusters of brilliant blue light orbiting a solitary sun. Elias frowned, recognizing the formation from an old star chart he'd salvaged years ago. "You think your people might have left something there?" he asked, hope threading through his exhaustion. She nodded, a flicker of something like anticipation crossing her face. Elias pushed himself to his feet and began rummaging through his supplies. He needed a ship, but getting one without drawing attention was nearly impossible. Still, there was one person who might be reckless enough to help him: Garrick Rowe, an old pilot with more debts than sense. Finding Garrick was easier than Elias anticipated. The man was nursing a drink at the Broken Spanner, a dingy dive bar deep in the industrial sector. Garrick's weathered face split into a grin when Elias approached. "I heard you were in deep," he said, swirling his drink lazily. "Didn't think you'd be desperate enough to come to me." "I need transport," Elias said, cutting straight to the point. "No questions, just a quick job." Garrick leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Quick jobs tend to get complicated. What's in it for me?" Elias produced a small, intricate device from his coat, an energy stabilizer, priceless on the black market. Garrick's eyes gleamed with greed, and after a long pause, he nodded. "All right, Vern. You got yourself a deal. But if this turns south, I'm not dying for you." "Wouldn't expect you to," Elias replied dryly. Back at the hideout, preparations were underway. Leora watched Elias work, her presence a steadying force in the chaos of his mind. As they packed their few belongings, the thought of leaving Nova 5 filled him with a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The city had been his home, but it had also become a cage. They reached the docks under cover of darkness, weaving through rusting cargo containers and flickering security drones. Garrick's ship, an aging freighter with more patched hull plates than original metal, sat waiting with engines idling. Elias felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. "Get in," Garrick urged, ushering them up the ramp. "We don't have long." Just as Elias stepped inside, a sharp explosion tore through the night. The blast sent crates flying, and mercenaries swarmed the area, their weapons gleaming under the harsh artificial lights. Elias cursed under his breath. They had been followed. Blaster fire erupted, cutting through the night like searing lances of light. Elias shoved Leora behind a console as Garrick scrambled to bring the ship online. Fear clawed at Elias' gut, but he forced himself to think clearly. "We can't fight them all," he shouted. "Get us airborne." Leora pressed her hands against the ship's console, her ethereal form pulsing with energy. The controls flickered to life, responding to her touch with an eerie precision that sent shivers down Elias' spine. The ship shuddered, then lifted off the ground just as the mercenaries closed in. Elias collapsed into a seat, breathing hard as the lights of Nova 5 dwindled below. They were free, for now, but the real challenge lay ahead, in the cold, silent expanse of space. The void of space stretched endlessly before them, a tapestry of stars scattered across the infinite black. Inside the cramped confines of the freighter, tension hung heavy in the recycled air. Elias leaned against the bulkhead, his eyes fixed on the NAV display as coordinates streamed across the screen in rapid succession. They were heading toward the distant star system Leora had shown him, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Garrick's voice crackled through the intercom. "We're not alone out here, Vern. Got a tail about half a click back. They're running dark, but I can feel M." Elias clenched his fists, his mind racing. "Can we outrun them?" "Maybe if I dump half our fuel and push the engines past safe limits," Garrick responded with a wry chuckle. "But I doubt you'd enjoy drifting through deep space without fuel." Leora, seated near the viewport, stared outward with an almost eerie stillness. Her translucent fingers traced patterns against the glass, and Elias could sense the weight of her thoughts. Though she rarely spoke in words, her presence carried an unspoken urgency. She turned to him suddenly, her gaze meeting his with quiet determination. "You have an idea, don't you?" Elias asked, kneeling beside her. Leora responded by pressing her palm to his forehead, sending a flood of images through his mind. Shattered vessels, ancient derelicts floating in forgotten orbits, remnants of technology far beyond human comprehension. One image stood out, a station hidden in the dense cloud of a gas giant, a place where secrets were buried and only the desperate dared to venture. "It's a gamble," Elias murmured, but he didn't see any better options. He turned back to Garrick. "Set course for the nearest gas giant. We'll lose them in the storm." The pilot grumbled but nodded, fingers dancing over the controls. The freighter banked sharply, engines roaring as they veered off course. The pursuing ship followed, closing the gap with menacing persistence. Red lights flared across the cockpit, indicating weapons lock. "Brace for impact," Garrick shouted, just as a burst of plasma fire grazed their hull, sending the ship into a violent shudder. Elias clung to the nearest handhold, his teeth grinding together as sparks showered the cramped cabin. Leora moved swiftly, her hands dancing over the ship's console with an innate understanding beyond Elias' comprehension. The freighter responded in kind, systems realigning and boosting their speed just enough to dive into the thick, swirling clouds of the gas giant. "Visibility's gone to hell," Garrick cursed. "Hope your alien friend knows what she's doing." Elias glanced at Leora, watching as she closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the ship and the storm outside. The freighter lurched, but continued downward, deeper into the planet's volatile atmosphere. Thunderous winds battered the hull, and sensors flickered erratically, overwhelmed by interference. The pursuing vessel hesitated at the edge of the storm, unwilling to risk the wrath of the swirling tempest. Elias let out a slow breath of relief, but they weren't safe yet. "We need to find that station," he said, "if it even exists." Garrick smirked through gritted teeth. "You really love chasing ghosts, don't you?" "Only when they're our last hope," Elias shot back. Minutes passed like hours. But then, through the dense clouds, the shadow of something massive loomed in the distance, an abandoned station, its silhouette barely discernible through the storm. Leora's eyes brightened, a flicker of hope crossing her features. Elias exhaled sharply. Looks like we've found our gamble. Let's hope it pays off. The distant clang grew louder, reverberating through the station like a death knell. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced at Leora, who remained focused on the console, her fingers flying over the alien symbols with precision. The data transfer was almost complete, but they were running out of time. A guttural growl echoed down the corridor, and Garrick's hand went to his sidearm. I don't like this, Vern. Whatever's down here isn't friendly. Elias nodded, his heart pounding. Leora, how much longer? She turned her gaze toward him, her expression calm but urgent. The console pulsed one final time, and with a soft hum, the data crystal ejected into her waiting hands. We have it, she said softly. Before Elias could respond, the bulkhead at the far end of the chamber exploded inward, sending shards of metal flying. A towering figure emerged from the smoke, mechanical, its limbs a grotesque fusion of organic tissue and machinery. Its hollow eyes locked onto them, and with a guttural hiss, it charged. Move! Elias shouted, firing his weapon. Plasma bolts struck the creature's armored form, barely slowing its advance. Garrick unloaded his own rounds, cursing under his breath. Leora stepped forward, her hands raised, and the symbols on the walls flared to life. Tendrils of energy surged forth, wrapping around the creature and holding it in place. It writhed and screamed, its mechanical components sparking violently. Go, Leora urged, sweat beading on her translucent skin. Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second before grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the airlock. Garrick followed, firing sporadically over his shoulder. They dashed through the decaying corridors, the sounds of tearing metal and enraged screeches chasing them. The freighter's airlock came into view, and Elias practically threw Leora inside before turning to cover their retreat. Garrick hit the emergency release, and the outer doors slammed shut just as the monstrous figure lunged. A deafening thud echoed through the hull, followed by eerie silence. Get us out of here, Elias barked at Garrick. The engines roared to life, and the freighter lurched free from the station's grasp, diving into the turbulent atmosphere of the gas giant. Elias collapsed into a seat, breathing hard, while Leora held the precious data crystal tightly to her chest. Garrick glanced at him, shaking his head with a tired grin. You always get me into the worst situations, Vern. Elias chuckled weakly. Yeah, but you keep coming back. Leora looked at the crystal, a faint smile touching her lips. We have what we need. The truth is out there. Elias met her gaze, feeling a strange sense of closure. The weight of the universe pressed a little less heavily on his shoulders. Then let's make sure it gets to the right hands. As the freighter soared through the storm, leaving the haunted station behind, Elias allowed himself a rare moment of hope. They had survived, and perhaps, against all odds, they had won. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and with Leora by his side, Elias felt for the first time in a long while that they weren't just running. They were heading somewhere worth going.